The funeral flowers were still fresh when Marcus walked in. He didn't hug me. He handed me divorce papers 48 hours after my mama's funeral, smiling like he'd won the lottery. I was heartbroken until my mama's lawyer said, "Mrs. Williams, there is something your husband doesn't know about the inheritance." When I found out what my mama did to protect me, I realized she knew exactly who he was all along. Back then, I didn't know the future. I only saw the wolf dropping his sheepskin. "Isabel, we need to talk," he said. Though he had clearly finished debating this ages ago, he sat across from me, creating a canyon between us. I looked at his hands. They were steady. Mine shook so hard I set my mug down before I shattered it. He cleared his throat, a professional sound, like he was starting a quarterly review. "This isn't working," he said. "It hasn't for a long time." The cruelty was efficient, clean, and entirely prepared. "Marcus, my mother died 2 days ago," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like tearing paper. "We buried her yesterday. The dirt isn't even settled." He didn't flinch. He actually checked his watch. "I know the timing isn't ideal," he replied, smooth as oil. "But there is never a good time for this. I want to be honest, I've been unhappy for years." Years. The word hung there. We had been married for 5. If he was unhappy for years, our entire life was a lie. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the diagnosis. He wasn't mourning. He wasn't even stressed. He wore the blue suit he saved for closing big deals. His posture was relaxed. He took a sip of water and set the glass down silently. That's when it hit me. He wasn't leaving because he was sad. He was leaving because he was finished waiting. He had endured the hospice care, and now his shift was over. "We can keep this civil," he said, sliding the folder. It hit the vase of white roses from the wake. "I've outlined a fair division of assets. The house we'll need to sell. The house my mother bought. The place where she took her last breath. I've already contacted an appraiser," he added. "He's coming tomorrow at 10. He wasn't asking permission, he was informing me." The grief in my chest hardened into something hot. I reached for the papers, my fingers brushing against the cold manila folder. Underneath his stack, I saw the corner of another paper. It was a bank statement. My mother's bank statement. The one I had left on the counter this morning, unopened. He had opened it. "It's a lot to process," he said, feigning sympathy while his eyes flicked to the paper. As the word, divorce, hung in the air, I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was calculating his commission. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the sharp rip of packing tape. I taped up a box of my mother's porcelain birds, feeling like I was suffocating them in the darkness of the cardboard. Marcus stood by the window, on the phone with the appraiser. He used words like liquidity and accelerated closing. It wasn't just cold, it was clinical. He sounded like he was selling a used car, not dissolving a marriage. I realized then that he hadn't just prepared for this week. He had been preparing for years. My mind drifted back to a barbecue 3 years ago. We were celebrating Marcus's promotion, or rather, the promotion he thought he deserved. He hadn't gotten it. He spent the evening pacing the backyard, kicking at the grass. My mother, Eliana, sat in her lawn chair, sipping iced tea. She wasn't looking at the sunset. She was watching him. Her gaze was sharp, unblinking, like a hawk tracking a field mouse. She saw the entitlement radiating off him before I ever did. She knew his hunger wasn't for success, but for status. Later that night, while I washed dishes, Mama came up beside me. She dried a plate slowly, her hands weathered but steady. "Isabel," she said, her voice low so Marcus wouldn't hear from the patio. "Pay attention to how he acts when he doesn't get what he wants." I brushed it off, calling it stress. "He's just ambitious, Mama," I argued. She didn't argue back. She just set the plate down. "Ambition builds, honey," she whispered. "Greed just takes." I should have listened to the silence that followed. Back in the kitchen, Marcus hung up the phone. He turned to me, his face composed into a mask of reasonable concern. "We need to list all the assets, Isabel, for the lawyers. It keeps things clean." He pulled a notepad from his pocket. He already had a list. I saw the words, brokerage account, and life insurance, written in his sharp, jagged handwriting. He wasn't asking for my input. He was confirming his inventory. He treated our life like a liquidation sale, and I was just another item to manage. "Since we're in a community property state," he continued, tapping the pen against the granite counter, "everything acquired during the marriage is split 50-50. That includes the inheritance since we're still legally together." He smiled, a tight stretching of lips that didn't reach his dead eyes. It's just the law, Ezzy. Fair is fair. The nickname felt like a slap. He used it to soften the blow of his robbery. He wasn't looking for fairness. He was hunting for a payout. I needed to get away from his suffocating voice. I went into my mother's study to pack her desk. The room still smelled like her lavender lotion and old paper. In the bottom drawer, tucked under a stack of knitting patterns, I found her old accounting ledger. It was a heavy, green book where she tracked every penny. I opened it, expecting to see grocery lists or utility bills. Instead, I saw a red ribbon pressed between the pages. It marked a spot near the very end of the book. I flipped to the marked page. There were no numbers, just a single entry written in red ink. The date was 6 months ago. The handwriting was firm, pressing deep into the paper. Prepare for the count. It read. He is waiting for the clock to run out. My breath hitched. She hadn't just been skeptical, she had been keeping score. She knew the final tally before I did. My mother hadn't just died, she had left me a map. I closed the book, hiding the evidence. 7 days later, the house felt like a minefield wrapped in bubble wrap. Marcus was in the kitchen humming. He hadn't hummed in 2 years. He was making pancakes, the smell of burnt butter filling the air. Morning, Izzy, he said, flipping a pancake with a flourish. He offered me a plate like a peace offering. The divorce papers were still on the dining table, pushed aside. It was a performance. I sat down, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the curtain to rise. I've been thinking, he started, pouring syrup with deliberate slowness. We're going through a transition, but we're adults. He leaned against the counter, crossing his ankles. This inheritance gives us a unique chance to exit this marriage strong. Both of us. He pulled out his phone, showing a graph. There is a venture group I've been talking to. High yield. It sets a person up for life. His eyes were bright, too bright. It was the hunger of a gambler staring at a roulette wheel. He slid the phone across the granite. I need you to authorize a transfer. Just in advance. He said it casually, like asking for salt. 100,000. It secures our spot before the round closes. He emphasized the word "our." Technically, since the funds haven't cleared probate, I need your signature. But once the divorce finalizes, I'll deduct it from my share. He smiled, that practiced insurance smile. It's just moving money from one pocket to another. Izzy, simple logic. For a second, exhaustion nearly won. Fighting him was like wading through wet cement. If I signed, maybe the hostility would vanish, and we could just be two strangers parting ways. It would help the settlement go faster? I asked. He nodded vigorously. Exactly. Liquid assets are easier to split. We help each other. He held out a pen. It was my mother's silver pen, taken from her desk. Seeing it in his greedy hand sent a jolt of ice down my spine. I stared at the silver barrel. My mother used it to sign checks, never asking permission from anyone. She worked double shifts at the hospital to buy this house, to fill those accounts. She didn't build a safety net just so a man could cut holes in it. I don't know, Marcus, I said, pulling my hand back. The probate lawyer said not to move anything. His smile faltered. The skin around his eyes tightened. The nice guy mask slipped, revealing the wireframe underneath. Lawyers are cautious because they bill by the hour. He snapped, his voice dropping. He took a step closer, invading my space. The smell of burnt butter turned nauseating. I am trying to do something for us, Isabel. Don't be difficult just to be difficult. He tapped the phone screen hard enough to make a sound. This deal doesn't wait for probate. It's a limited window. His breathing was shallow. He wasn't excited anymore, he was panicked. He was sweating through his shirt. Why is the window so tight? I asked, standing up to meet his eyes. He looked away, focusing on the dirty pan in the sink. I told the guys I was good for it. He muttered. They're expecting the wire by Friday. The truth hit me hard. He hadn't just found an opportunity, he had already bought in. He wasn't asking for a loan. He was asking for a lifeline, and he assumed I was too weak to cut the rope. The law office smelled of mahogany and old leather, a contrast to the chaos I had left behind. Mr. Henderson stood up as I entered, his tweed jacket looking as timeless as the man himself. He had been my mother's attorney for 30 years. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply pointed to the wingback chair opposite his desk. Isabel, he said, his voice grave, we need to review the structure of the estate. I sat down, clutching my purse like a shield. He opened a thick file, the papers rustling in the quiet room. I understand Marcus has filed. he said, peering over his spectacles. And I understand he is inquiring about community property laws. I nodded, feeling the shame burn my cheeks. He says it's 50-50. He wants to liquidate immediately. Henderson stopped moving. He looked at me with a pity that wasn't condescending, but protective. That is exactly what your mother anticipated, he said softly. She sat in that very chair 6 months ago. He leaned forward, interlacing his fingers on the blotter. Your mother observed things, Isabel. She saw the ambition that turned into entitlement. He pulled a specific document from the folder. It was bound in blue. Mrs. Williams. Here is something your husband doesn't know about the inheritance, he said. The words hung in the air. Marcus believes this falls under standard marital assets. He is operating under the assumption that you inherited directly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't, I asked. No, Henderson replied, a small smile touching his lips. 6 months ago, Eliana transferred every asset. The house, the portfolio, the insurance, into the Eliana Williams Inheritance Protection Trust. He tapped the blue folder. You are the sole beneficiary, but the trust is the owner. It is an irrevocable instrument created prior to the divorce filing. He paused to let the legal weight sink in. By law, this is separate property. It is insulated from spousal claims. Marcus is entitled to absolutely nothing. The room seemed to tilt. I had spent the last week feeling small. Backed into a corner by Marcus's confident bullying, I thought I was fighting a losing battle against the law itself. But I wasn't. My mother hadn't just left me money, she had built a fortress around me. She had seen the wolf at the door long before he knocked. He doesn't know, I whispered. Henderson shook his head. Not until we tell him. The timing is your choice. Henderson reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in that familiar, slanted script. She asked me to give you this only after the trust was explained. My hands trembled as I took it. It wasn't a legal document. It was a final conversation. I broke the seal, the paper tearing with a sharp sound. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. I read the first line and felt tears prick my eyes. My girl, she wrote, this money is not for negotiation. It is for freedom. Do not buy his peace. Buy your own. The words blurred, but the strength behind them was crystal clear. She had armed me from the grave. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, dry-eyed now. The fear that had been strangling me for days loosened its grip. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like a widow. I felt like a fortress. 3 days later, the conference room felt like an arena. Marcus sat on the left, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he charged by the minute. His name was Fletcher, and he wore a suit that cost more than my first car. Marcus wouldn't look me in the eye. He tapped his fountain pen against a legal pad, radiating a nervous energy. I sat beside Mr. Henderson, my hands folded on the polished mahogany. I wasn't shaking today, I was waiting. Fletcher cleared his throat, opening a binder thick with spreadsheets. We've outlined a preliminary division, he stated, sliding a copy toward us. Given the duration of the marriage and the recent inheritance, my client seeks 50% of the estate value, plus spousal support during the transition. He spoke as if the outcome was already decided. Marcus finally looked up, offering a small, pitiful shrug. It's just standard procedure. Izzy, he said. We want to be fair. The lie tasted like ash. Mr. Henderson didn't open the binder. He didn't even pick up a pen. He just watched them with the patience of a man who had seen 1,000 greedy men before. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Fletcher shifted in his seat. Marcus stopped tapping his pen. Is there a problem? Fletcher asked, his confidence showing a hairline fracture. Henderson finally moved. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the single blue folder. The sound of it hitting the table echoed. There is a significant misunderstanding regarding the assets, Henderson said, his voice level. He slid the blue folder across the mahogany. Mrs. Williams did not inherit the estate directly. 6 months prior to her passing, Eliana Williams established an irrevocable inheritance protection trust. Fletcher frowned, snatching the document. He scanned the first page, then the second. His posture changed instantly. He slumped, the air leaving his lungs. He knew exactly what the words separate property meant. He knew the game was over. Marcus stared at his lawyer, confusion twisting his features. What is it? He demanded. It's just a trust, we can break it. Fletcher closed the folder slowly, shaking his head. It's irrevocable, Marcus. The assets are titled to the trust, not Isabel. They are completely excluded from the marital estate. The color drained from Marcus's face. He snatched the paper, reading the clauses himself. His eyes darted frantically, looking for a loophole that wasn't there. The fair share, he demanded, didn't exist. She had no right to do this, Marcus hissed, slamming the folder shut. The mask of the grieving husband disintegrated. That old woman manipulated the finances to cut me out. I felt a surge of cold anger. Do not speak about my mother, I said, my voice cutting through his noise. She didn't manipulate anything. She protected what she built. Marcus looked at me with pure venom. There was no love left in his eyes. Only the rage of a thief caught red-handed. Fletcher began packing his briefcase, his movements hurried. We will need to review this privately, he muttered, clearly distancing himself from a losing battle. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Marcus didn't move. He stared at me across the table, his hands clenched into fists on the mahogany. The look wasn't just anger, it was desperation. The predator realized the prey had teeth. This isn't over, Isabel, he whispered. But we both knew he had already lost the war. I thought the war ended in the conference room, but I was wrong. It had only moved to a new battlefield. That evening, my phone vibrated against the nightstand, a single buzz that soon turned into a swarm. I ignored it at first, sipping tea that had gone cold hours ago. Then the screen lit up with a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Is this true? She asked, attaching a link. My stomach twisted. I clicked the link, and my own face stared back at me from Marcus's profile. It was a manifesto of martyrdom written in polished, sorrowful prose. He claimed he was blindsided, discarded by a wife he had supported through grief. He wrote about his sweat equity in our home, claiming I had manipulated my dying mother to steal his future. He used words like financial abuse and cold-hearted, painting himself as the loving husband cast aside for a paycheck. Reading it felt like physical violence. He wasn't just lying, he was erasing the last 5 years of my life and replacing them with a story where he was the hero. The comments below the post were growing like a fungus. Strangers who didn't know my middle name were dissecting my character. They called me greedy. They called me a gold digger. One woman wrote, "This is why men shouldn't marry modern women," and it had 50 likes. I felt the walls of the house closing in. The digital world was bleeding into reality, staining everything it touched. I scrolled faster, looking for someone, anyone, to defend me. But the silence from our mutual friends was deafening. They weren't defending me. They were watching the show. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking with the need to scream. I wanted to post the trust documents. I wanted to upload photos of the unpaid bills he hid in his desk. I typed out a furious response, detailing every moment of his neglect and every dollar of his greed. The cursor blinked, mocking me. I was one click away from detonating the truth, but a voice in my head, my mother's voice, stopped me. She always said that arguing with a fool only proves there are two. I deleted the draft, but the rage remained. I called Mr. Henderson instead, my voice cracking as I explained the post. He listened without interrupting, his silence heavy on the line. "Do not engage, Isabel," he commanded, his tone sharp. "This is bait. He wants a public fight because he lost the legal one." He explained the concept of strategic silence. "Let him dig," Henderson said. "The more he talks, the more he reveals. Document everything, but say nothing." It felt like standing still while being pelted with stones. It went against every instinct I had, but I trusted the man who protected my mother. A knock at the door made me jump, but it was only Nia. She didn't ask if I was okay, she knew I wasn't. She walked in, took the phone from my trembling hands, and turned it off. "We are not doing this tonight," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She pulled me onto the sofa and poured fresh tea. Her presence was a physical anchor in the spinning storm. "He's trying to control the narrative, because he lost control of the money," Nia said. "Don't give him the satisfaction of your pain." But the silence was hard to maintain as the week dragged on. The post had gone local, spreading through our church group and the grocery store. I walked down the aisle of the supermarket and felt eyes on me. People whispered behind their hands. A cashier who used to ask about my mother now barely made eye contact. It felt like I was wearing a scarlet letter stitched by my husband's lies. He was winning the court of public opinion, and I was drowning in the unfairness of it all. I felt naked, exposed, and utterly alone. Emboldened by the likes and shares, Marcus escalated. Text wasn't enough anymore, he needed a performance. On Thursday night, a new notification lit up Naya's phone. It was a video. Marcus was standing on a dark street, tears glistening on his cheeks under a streetlight. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice breaking as he pleaded for closure and fairness. He talked about being locked out of the home he helped build. It was Oscar-worthy acting. He looked broken, harmless, and utterly convincing to anyone who didn't know the monster beneath the mask. We watched the video in silence, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark living room. He's pathetic, Nia muttered, reaching for a chip. But I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was looking at the background. The street lamp flickered in a specific, rhythmic way. There was a hedge behind him with a distinctive gap where a car had hit it years ago. My blood ran cold. He wasn't filming this from a random location or his friend's apartment. He was filming it right now. He was standing directly outside my house. Nia, look at the timestamp, I whispered, pointing at the corner of the screen. It was posted 3 minutes ago. And look at the hedge. Nia squinted, then gasped. The video wasn't just a plea for sympathy, it was evidence. He was violating my privacy to curry favor with strangers. He was so obsessed with painting himself as the victim that he had accidentally documented his own stalking. He handed us the weapon we needed. I didn't feel fear anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency line. The silence was over. The police cruiser lights swept across the lawn, but the street was empty. Marcus had vanished like smoke, leaving only the digital echo of his presence on my phone. The officer was polite but dismissive, scribbling in his notebook with a weary sigh. Technically, ma'am, standing on a sidewalk isn't a crime unless he makes a direct threat, he explained. I gripped Nia's arm, feeling the cold indifference of the law. He was escalating, testing the perimeter, and they were waiting for him to draw blood. Naya refused to let me stay there alone, so we drove to her apartment. The night passed in a blur of restless sleep and jumping at shadows. When morning broke, the sun felt intrusive, exposing the cracks in my reality. We drove back to my house in silence, the dread sitting heavy in my stomach. As we pulled into the driveway, the dread turned to ice. The front door wasn't just unlocked. It was hanging off its hinges, a gaping wooden mouth screaming of violence. I stepped over the splintered frame, my boots crunching on shattered glass. The house didn't smell like home anymore, it smelled of chemical fumes and raw aggression. Drawers had been pulled out and dumped, their contents spewed across the hardwood like entrails. It wasn't a robbery, the TV was still mounted, and my laptop sat untouched on the coffee table. This was a tantrum manifest in physical space. He hadn't come to take things, he had come to punish the things that I loved. I walked into the kitchen, the heart of the home where my mother had taught me to bake bread. My breath hitched in my throat. Across the pale yellow wall in jagged black spray paint was a single word: Gar-ed-y. The paint dripped down like toxic sludge, staining the baseboards. It was a desecration of the sanctuary Mama had built. He wanted to brand me with his narrative, to scar the house so deeply that I would never feel safe inside these walls again. Nia gasped behind me, but I kept moving toward the bedroom. This was the epicenter of his rage. My jewelry box was upside down, necklaces tangled in knots that would never come undone. My clothes were slashed, ribbons of silk and denim covering the floor. He had targeted anything that made me feel beautiful or independent. It was a terrifying intimacy, a specific knowledge of what would hurt the most. He wasn't just destroying property, he was trying to shred my identity into unrecognizable pieces. I didn't cry. The time for tears had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I pulled out my phone and dialed the detective who had given me his card days ago. This wasn't a civil dispute anymore, it was a felony. He's been here, I said, my voice steady as stone. I want to press charges. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no lingering loyalty to the man I married. With that call, I severed the last thread connecting us. I chose war. The police tape went up, a yellow warning to the neighborhood. I sat on the porch steps, feeling the weight of the ruin behind me. Then, a truck pulled up. Then a minivan. Mrs. Gable from down the street marched up the walk carrying a bucket of primer. 2 deacons from Mama's church followed with trash bags and tools. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't ask about the Facebook post. They saw the wreckage, and they saw me. They simply rolled up their sleeves. For the next 4 hours, the house buzzed with the sound of restoration. We scrubbed the black paint until our knuckles ached. layering fresh white primer over his hate. The word, jar-edy, vanished, buried under the collective effort of people who actually knew me. Nia swept the glass while Mrs. Gable made coffee in the surviving pot. The isolation Marcus tried to enforce shattered. He thought destroying my house would break me. But it only revealed the steel foundation of the community holding me up. The call came late in the afternoon. The detective's voice was grim but satisfied. "We picked him up at a motel off the interstate," he said. He still had the spray paint in his trunk. Marcus was in custody, facing charges for burglary, vandalism, and stalking. The restraining order was granted immediately. The monster who had terrorized me online and in my home was now just a man in a cell, stripped of his smartphone and his power. The fear finally began to recede. Before I left the house to stay with Nia one last night, I did a final sweep. I walked past the drying paint and the re-hung door. In the hallway, I stopped. The table where I kept Mama's framed portrait had been tipped over, but the photo itself lay face up on the carpet, unbroken. The glass was intact. Even in his blind, destructive rage, he hadn't dared to smash her face. He destroyed my things, but he couldn't touch her legacy. 6 months later, the gavel didn't bang, it tapped. The divorce was finalized by default, because Marcus couldn't attend from his cell. The felony charges had revoked his bail, leaving him plenty of time to think about sweat equity. I sat with Mr. Henderson, listening to the judge grant me sole ownership. There was no fight left. The man who wanted to count every penny was left with 0. I walked out into the bright October sun, finally breathing air that didn't taste like a battle. The inheritance money sat in the trust, heavy and silent, waiting for a purpose. I didn't want a vacation home. Instead, I met with Henderson to draft new papers. We launched the Eliana Williams Fund, a grant for women trapped in financial abuse. It felt right to turn Marcus's greed into someone else's escape hatch. Signing those checks was the first time the money felt clean. It wasn't just a shield anymore, it was a sword for women who hadn't found their voice yet. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers. I used to bring white lilies, the color of mourning, but today felt different. The grass was turning gold, and the air was crisp. I walked toward her headstone, boots crunching on fallen leaves. I wasn't coming to cry or ask for advice this time. I was coming to give a report. The weight on my chest, the one that had been there since the funeral, was finally gone. I stood tall. "I did it, Mama," I said to the granite. I didn't let him take a dime. The wind rustled the trees, sounding like her soft approval. I traced her name with my finger. For years, I believed love meant enduring discomfort. That being a good wife meant shrinking to fit a man's ego. I was wrong. You taught me that love protects. You didn't leave me this money to keep me comfortable. You left it to make me dangerous to men like him. I looked down at my clothes. For half a year, I had worn nothing but grays, hiding in the shadows of my own life. Today, I was wearing a coat the color of deep ocean blue. It was vibrant, undeniable, and loud. It was the color of a woman who no longer needed to apologize for taking up space. I arranged the sunflowers, their petals bright against the gray stone. They looked like little suns defying the coming winter. The mourning period was officially over. Walking back to the car, I felt lighter, as if gravity had loosened its grip. The trust was secure, the house was repaired, and the foundation was reviewing its first applicant. I pulled my keys from my pocket, the metal cool against my skin. I got into the driver's seat and adjusted the mirror, catching a glimpse of my own eyes. They were clear. My mother didn't just leave me a fortune, she left me the keys to my own life, and I was finally driving.